Back to AppDev channel. In today's video, we will start implementing the job submit API, which is going to accept the submit request from the client UI layer, and it is going to create an SQS, and finally it is going to call the job process API, the backend API. That's the main intention of today's video. We will create a client-side REST API for the job submission. Later on, we will log into AWS console and create an IAM user. We will see why we need IAM user, how to create an IAM user, what all policies we have to set up for that IAM user, what is the access credentials, why we need the access credentials. And later on, we will set up our workspace to use the AWS services because we have to use the SQS service in our client API to listen to the message, to create an SQS and also to listen to the messages that are being pushed by the backend API, right? So for that, we have to use the SQS service in our client side project. So we'll see how to set up the workspace for that. And then we will create an SQS from our job submit API when the job is submitted from the UI layer. So this is the agenda for today's session. So without any further delay, let's start creating the REST API for the job submission process. Okay, for that, let me go here to my workspace. Okay, here I'm going to create a Spring Starter project. Okay, so I'm going to name this project as the job submit client services. Okay, so I'm going to use Maven jar package in Java version 17 instead of com.appdev. I'm going to use this is the job submit client services project. Okay, package also I'm going to modify this to com.appdev. Okay, so that's all. So the initial package which I'm going to import is the web dependency because I'm going to create a microservice, right? Spring web dependency I'm going to import. So later on, if any packages are required, then we will add them. For now, I'm starting with the Spring web dependency. So it's creating a project now. So our project is ready. Then what we do, we have to create a controller, right? So let me go here, and in this package, let me create a new controller, new class. It's going to be in the controller package. Okay, and it will be the job submit controller. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, let me go ahead and create it. I'm going to annotate this class as a REST controller. And then um, I'm going to annotate this with a request mapping like my app. Okay, and then I'm going to create a method that accepts the request from the UI layer. We'll see. Okay, this is going to be the job submit job method, and what it does is it is going to accept some parameters from the form, right? Like the job name, from date to date, like that. It is going to accept it. Okay, so all those will be in one request object. Okay, it will be coming as a post method. So I'll be annotating this method as post, and submit job is the URL for this method. Okay, so it's going to accept the job submit request vivo, which we have to create. Okay, job submit request vivo. Let me create this vivo. I'm going to create this vivo in the controller vivo package. Job submit request vivo. Okay, now let me write a annotation for this one. Component. So what are the request parameters I'm going to get from the UI layer, like the job name which they are going to submit, and what is the start date and end date they are going to select in the form. And I'll also get the user ID who is submitting the job. Okay, that's all. So let me generate getter and setters for it, and also one no argument constructor also. Let me generate constructor from super class. Yeah, let me also generate a parameterized constructor as well. Yeah, that's all. So whenever the job is submitted as a post request to this API, all the request parameters will be placed into this object. So what I have to do, I have to annotate this job submit request vivo, that it is going to accept the request body, right? So at request body is the annotation for it. So we have to do the submit job to the backend, right? But before doing the submit job, we have to create a SQS. So all those things I'm going to do it in a separate class, like submission of the job to the backend and also creating an SQS before submission. So for that I'm going to create a service, job submit service. Okay, so let me create that service and auto wire it here. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new class. Instead of controller, that will be in the service package, and that will be placed here. Job submit service is the class name. So I'm going to annotate this with that service. Okay, and then here also there will be a method public void submit job. So what the submit job is actually going to do, it's actually going to create an SQS and then submit the job, right? So whatever the input request body we have received from the UI layer to controller, that will be passed here. Okay, job submit request to Vivo, job submit request to Vivo. Okay, and then what we do, we get the request vivo dot get user ID. So to create an SQS, we are going to create an SQS dynamically based on the user that is selected, that is submitting the job, and the job name that the user has selected for this submission, right? Based on those two parameters, we are going to create an SQS in AWS. Okay, job name. job submit request vivo dot uh, get job name. Okay, so these two parameters are ready for us. Now what we have to do, we have to create an SQS, and then we have to create an input object to call backend service, and then call backend API, which is not yet developed. Okay, so in order to start with SQS, okay, what we are going to do before starting the SQS, right? Let me import the job, or let me auto-variate here the jobs submit service. Okay, so once this is ready, I can call the job submit service from the controller with whatever the request object has received from the post body, right? So, so in order to first create an SQS in our project, we have to have the AWS services access to our project, right? So in general, suppose if your microservice is running an AWS services like ECS service or EKS node service, right? Then your ECS services will be given the access to work with the SQS service automatically. I mean, there will be some policies will be given to your ECS task or something. Then your ECS service will directly be able to connect with the SQS services, read write operations. But if you are running a project or a service that is running outside of the AWS environment, like our standalone AWS project here, the local code, right? Then we have to create an account or an IAM user in AWS console. And those credentials we have to use in our project to connect to the AWS services. So for that, I have an AWS account that was set up already here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to the IAM service. Okay, you can also search for it here. Okay, so when you go to the IAM service, let's go here. Here we have to create an user. Okay, so here if you go here, you can create a user like this, add users. So my app dev user is the username which I'm giving. Okay, after that we have to set the permissions. Okay, what all permissions are required. So with this account, what we are going to do, we are going to use it in our client API or in the backend API, right, to access the SQS service. So here there are some set of permissions that are predefined by the AWS. So we can give the SQS permission to our user which we are going to use in our project, to this user. So Amazon SQS full access will give all the permissions. After that, let's just click on next. Here it is showing the what all permissions the user is having, and then create an user. So with this the user is created, but when you click on it, you will have an option to set the security credentials like this. If you have to go to the security credentials section of that user, and then here access keys. So we have to create the access key. So as we are going to create an access key for this user, and this user is going to be used in a project that is running outside of the AWS environment, right? So like our local project code, we can select the local project or the application running outside of AWS. So, okay, and then let's create next. Here some description tag value, what is the purpose of this uh, access key that we are going to use. So the purpose is, this is creating to use in SQS job submit and job process API services. Okay, So with that, I'm going to create an access key. So here it is showing the access key and my secret access key. Okay. So I have to download these things, or I have to view and open it in a use it in my project. Okay. We will show you how to. I'll show you how to use them in the project. Okay. For now, let me just create the credentials as a CSV file. Okay, it is downloaded as a CSV file here. So once the file, so now what I have done is I have downloaded the access credentials CSV file, and it has the access key ID and the secret access key, right? So I have created them as constants in my app constants.java file. So with that, we have the credentials that are required to connect to AWS services from our project. But we have to use the AWS Java SDK API to create an SQS from our project by using those credentials, right? So for that, we have to add the capability or the dependency to our project to use the AWS Java SDK API. For that, we have to add the dependencies management. Under it, we have to add the dependencies. Under it, we have to add the dependency. So here we are going to use the AWS SDK API, right? For that, we have to start with group ID, software dot Amazon dot AWS SDK, and artifact ID. We have to use the bomb, and the version which we have got to import for this bomb is 2.20.11, and after version we have to use the type bomb, and the scope we are going to import it. Import scope, we need this dependency, right? So after that, what we have to use, we don't have to download all of the libraries for all of the AWS services. We just want to interact with the SQS service, right? So we just have to download only the SQS libraries. So for that, again, what is the, from where we want to download? We want to download from the group that was mentioned in the dependency management, software dot Amazon dot AWS SDK, and after that we have to mention the artifact ID as SQS. That's it. Then what it is going to do, it is going to update your dependencies that it has downloaded the SQS dependency here. See, this SQS dependency is downloaded. Now we have to go to our service class. Here, this is the service class, right? Here we want to connect to the AWS SQS service and create an SQS. But I don't want to create the SQS in my job submit service itself. I want to create them in a separate client class where all the AWS related interactions will be performed. Okay, so I'm going to name that class in a package client and name that class as AWS client. So all of the operations that are required to connect with AWS services will be performed here. So here I have to create an SQS, right? Create queue. So for this, I'm going to get what I'm going to get only the queue name. Okay. So once we get the queue name from service, this will be called from the service. Okay. So in order to create a queue, we first have to get the SQS client. Okay, how to create an SQS client? So first let's create that SQS client, public SQS client. This is just a method I'm giving, method name. Here I'm going to use the AWS Java SDK APIs. This is the SQS client I'm going to create, and it is going to return it. Okay, so we have SQS client class that is available. in the AWS Java SDK API. Here SQS client.builder. So in the builder, we have to mention the credentials provider. So what credentials we have to use? We have to use the AWS credential provider. So there is a subclass to it, which is static credentials provider. Okay. So we are going to create a static credential provider using the AWS base credentials subclass. Okay. Basic credentials. So here what we have to do, we have to pass our access key ID that we have downloaded from the CSV file from the AWS console, which we have downloaded, which we have mentioned in our constant file, right? So for that, what we are going to do, app constants dot access key ID, I'm going to refer. Similarly, app constants dot secret access key, I'm going to refer. So with this, we are going to get the SQS client. It's going to return an SQS client. Okay, there is a problem. We'll see it. So what is the problem? Here at the end, what we have to use, we have to build the SQS client builder. So later on, we have to return the SQS client from this method. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this client as static. We'll see what is required. So without creating the object, then we can call this method directly, right? So we have the SQS client ready. Now we have to create a queue, right? So string, it is going to return a queue name after its creation. Okay. So what we are going to do now, we have to use this SQS client here. Okay. I'm going to call that SQS client method. Okay. Now under SQS client method, we have SQS client.create queue method available. So for this one, we have to pass the create queue request. So let's create the create queue request object. Okay, create queue request, equal to create queue request dot builder. Okay, dot builder dot queue name we have to mention. We are going to get it from the service class, right? Queue name. Okay, fine. So queue name is fine. Then we have to mention attributes, how the queue should be created, what is the encryption key we are going to use if we want to enable the encryption for the data that we are going to place in the SQS, right? We have to mention the encryption key, KMS key. KMS is another service offered by the AWS to encrypt your data. Okay, what is the key that we have to use? That is that we have to specify as an attribute to that key. Okay. Similarly, what kind of queue we are going to create, whether it is FIFO queue or the standard queue. Similarly, we have to mention some other properties like content-based deduplication or the message visibility. All those things we have to mention as attributes when we are creating the key. So let me just use this method attributes. Okay, attributes we have to use as a map. Okay, so for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create map of attributes. Okay, there is one map available, there is one class available with map that accepts queue attribute name. Okay, queue attribute name and string. So queue attribute name is available with the AWS SDK package. Okay, so attributes. Hash map I'm going to create attributes dot put. Okay, so q attribute name, q attribute name, it has the list of attributes that we can set for a queue and creating it. Okay, like this deduplication, delay seconds, 5 for queue. Okay, so we are going to create a 5 for queue, right? So for that, what we have to do, we have to mention boolean dot true. So yes. Okay, after that, what is the KMS key which we are going to use for the encryption? Okay, there is one KMS that is coming by default for any AWS region that we are going to use. Q attribute name dot KMS master key ID. So there is a KMS that comes, right? That is the, this is the one. Okay, alias slash AWS slash SQS. So when we have it, we have another property like q attribute name. Let me go here. KMS data key reuse period seconds. Okay, key will be reused for how many seconds that we have to mention here, like for every 300 seconds. Okay, there is another attribute that we have to mention, content based deduplication. So this will be used when the same kind of data is being sent for the repeated messages, right? Then this will be used to uniquely identify whether it has to send the message or not. Okay, so I'm going to enable that content based deduplication messages. So if the same message is being sent repeatedly, then it won't send. Okay, if we enable this content based deduplication. Okay, for that, what we have to use again, boolean dot true dot string to string. So there are some problems now. Let's import everything here. Hash map. Okay, now we have created the attributes that are required to create a queue, right? So we have it here in the attributes section. Later on, when we create any AWS resource, we have to use the tags. So in general, in any real-time application, right? So the billing will be calculated based on the application name. Okay. Suppose there will be multiple n number of projects that will be running uh, in your application, right? So for each project, if they want to calculate what is the billing, what is the usage of the AWS service for each project, then we have to mention them in the tags section below. So say for example, this is the application that I'm going to use, this SQS service or the S3 service. All those resources that are tagged under my application uh, will be coming as the build under this application. Okay, so for that we have to use the tags section. Okay, so tags in general, what we mention, again we have to create another map of string and string tags, hash map. Tags I generally mention app name. Okay, app name I generally mention. What is my app name? The job submit app is name. Okay, what is the other one I can mention? Tags dot put contact. Okay, this is the contact email of the person who is managing this application. Okay, like this we can mention, and then we are done. Okay, So we have mentioned the queue name, we have mentioned the attributes, we have mentioned the tags. That's it. We just have to build it now. So create queue request is ready. And then we have what we have to do, we have to go here and pass it. Okay. So once the queue is created, what we return, okay, SQS client dot, okay, we are already using it, create queue, right? So this will return create queue response, create queue response. So from the create queue response dot queue URL will be returned when the queue is created successfully. Okay, the URL of the created Amazon SQS queue. Okay, that I'm going to return from here. Okay, so with that we are done with our client class. Now what we have to use, we have to use this client class in our service class. So let's go to our service class and call our client class create queue method, AWS client dot create queue. Okay, what is the problem? Why the create queue is not exposed here? Because it's not a static. We are trying to use it as a static method, right? So let's use it as a static method only, create queue. For this we have to pass the queue name. So what is the queue name? Okay, queue name, what we are going to use, string queue name. It will be created dynamically for every user who is submitting the job on the user, what job the user is selecting, right? So user ID plus, it's a combination of user ID and the job name. Okay, so here, yeah. So with this, what we have done so far today, we have created the REST API that accepts the request body as a post, and we have created an IAM user access credentials. Also we have set it up, access policies to use the SQS service. SQS access policy has been set up for that ID which we are using in our workspace in our project. So we have set up the workspace as well. So we have used the AWS Java SDK API to create an SQS. Now it's time for us to test this. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to run this as a Spring Boot application. So the application is started. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll open my Postman and hit that. Okay, here I open my Postman and I'll invoke that service here. So localhost 8080 app submit job. What is this submit job? Let me come here to the controller, submit job. Okay, let me modify this, submit job. Okay, if I go to body section, so this is the user ID, this is the job name, and start date and end date I'm going to mention. Okay, for this period I want to run this job. Okay, the moment I trigger this API, the client side API, right? What it does, okay, let me go to SQS services here. So I'll search for SQS in the console. I'm going to SQS. Okay, so here there are no queues. Okay, let's just see. Yeah, there are no queues. So if the application is working fine, then it has to create a queue here. Okay, let me trigger a request to the API. So it is currently giving 500 internal server error. It's not able to create an SQS. So let's just see why it is not able to create it. Unable to load region from any of the providers in the chain. Yeah, because whenever we are creating any AWS services, right, we have to mention which region services we want to use. Okay, so here we have created an AWS service, the SQS client service, right? So here we mentioned it, right? So here there will be one method dot region. So in which region we are going to use? We are going to use region dot ap underscore south one. Okay, that is where we are going to create our SQS services. So let me submit it. Let me run it. So the job is running. Now let me hit this service again. It is still giving a problem. Okay, let's just see. The name of a 54 queue can only include alphanumeric characters, hyphens, or underscores must end with .54 suffix and be 1 to 80 characters length. So this is the queue limitation. Okay, it should be 80 characters length and it should be suffixed with .54 because we are creating the 54 queue, and it should all only be having this. Okay, let's go to our service class where we created our queue name. Okay, here there in the client we mentioned that we are going to use 54, right? That's why we have to prefix our queue name with the .54. Okay, now let's come here and request the service again. Now it returned 200. Okay, right? Now let me go to my AWS SQS services. See this app-dev3 and the job 1.54. So with this, we are able to successfully create SQS whenever the job is submitted from the UI layer to client middleware layer. Okay. So in the subsequent, in the next video, what we do, we create a backend service and we will invoke this service. We will use that backend service to push messages to SQS. Okay. But before that, what we have to do, we also have to submit the job to the backend, right? Once the backend job is ready, then we will submit that backend job from the middleware after the SQS is created here. Let me go here. So here we created an SQS, right? So we have to prepare a job submit